you would think that something so profound and raw, like death, like it's right here for them, would just like have such an enormous pull on my life and on their life too, actually, that you would make all these revolutionary changes. And we still, all of us, per their own story, but me specifically, I still get sucked into the stupidities of life, forgetting that I'm supposed to have had this huge epiphany, like take every moment because it could be your last. And it's just amazing how quickly we fall back into our old habits, or we fall back into just complacency.
This is Andrew Petty is Dying, where we tap into the power of our mortality to become the people we were made to be and live the lives we were made to live. I'm your host, Andrew Petty, and I'm dying. I hate to say it, but so are you. For a few promising years, three-time Olympian Caroline Lalive was among the top female ski racers in the world. Slowly but surely, though, plagued by injuries and struggling with her mental game, the gap between Caroline's raw potential and her real-world race results got wider and wider. Eventually, in 2009, after a tumultuous 13-year career, characterized by grit, determination, courage, some notable accomplishments, and many disappointments, Caroline closed out the pro skiing chapter of her life with a fall in her final race. In this episode, Caroline shares candidly about the gnawing regret that has stuck with her since her retirement from skiing, and what she sees more clearly today that could have helped her younger self. And if we're willing to hear it, can help all of us. Surprisingly, though, it's not regret about her career that brings tears to the surface for Caroline in this conversation. Instead, it's regret about things left unsaid until it was too late. And it turns out that there's a lot of wisdom for life to be gained from analyzing good skiing technique. Caroline and I unpack that metaphor together before turning the corner in her story to the heartbreaking encounter with mortality that she's in the middle of today. This was a thoroughly fascinating and instructive conversation for me. I think it will be for you too. On one level, it was simply fun and enlightening to get a glimpse into the world of elite athletics through Caroline's eyes. On another level, though, you'll see that Caroline's story as an elite athlete is still our story. It's the human story of tragedy and triumph, fear and courage, regret and gratitude, life and death. Caroline Lalive is the oldest of three, born to her Swiss father and American mother. She spent most of her childhood in the mountains surrounding Lake Tahoe, with regular stints in Switzerland, where she first learned to ski. After a 3-year stint near Mount Hood, Oregon, Caroline and her family moved to Steamboat Springs, Colorado in 1995. Caroline, her husband, Olympic medalist Nelson Carmichael, and their 2 kids still call Steamboat home. Here are some of the highlights from Caroline's skiing career. At the 1998 Nagano Olympics, she placed 7th overall in the combined event at age 18, making her the top American finisher in that event to date. She was the overall junior world champion in 1999, meaning that her performances in the 5 disciplines of slalom, GS, Super G, downhill, and combined were the best in the world for 20 and under overall. In 2000, she became the first American to score points in every alpine event. In the 2001 season, she placed 3rd in the world in downhill and Super G. She went into the 2002 Salt Lake Olympics ranked 2nd in the world in combined, 5th in downhill, and 5th in Super G. She was 3-time national champion, and she won silver in the World Cup finals in downhill and placed 5th in Super G. Without further ado, let's dive in and get to know the person behind the career stats and uncover wisdom for living from her story. Our conversation today will have basically 2 chapters, I think. We'll see where it goes because we're going to go where it goes, but I think there's going to be 2 chapters to this conversation at least. And the first will be delving into your skiing career and seeing what we can learn from your experience as an elite athlete all of those years, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. We'll tease that out. And the second chapter will be an encounter with mortality that you're in the midst of right now. It's a lot to bite off in the course of one interview, but I can't stand to not touch on both of those. And if we find we run out of time and we've got a lot more to talk about, then I hope you'll be willing to come back. I won't make it too miserable for you. So Caroline, I had a blast yesterday. I just Googled Caroline Lalive because even though we are acquaintances here in town and I know you were an Olympic athlete and performed at a high level, and so did your husband, and in our town and in many parts of the world, there's a celebrity status that goes with you. So I kind of knew, yeah, Caroline had a big deal career and did some cool stuff, but I didn't know much more than that. So it was fun for me to just Google Caroline Lalive and see what popped up. And of course, videos started to pop up. So I spent time watching excerpts from videos from media channels that had covered some of your events. You've done a lot of video for Steamboat Locally for the ski mount, and you've done ski instruction videos. So I began to get a sense for kind of some of the public stuff that you've done out there. And also to get a sense for the fact that you're really good on camera.
Well, thanks.
You seem to have, do you like doing that kind of stuff?
I really do. Yeah.
You were doing some promo spots for different businesses around here. And I thought, holy smokes, she's good on camera. It looks totally comfortable. You're super articulate. We don't have the benefit of camera today, but so that was one of the things I learned about you. And then of course I began to piece together an understanding of your career from Google, what you're able to find on Google, which is the dangerous way to explore someone's career, of course. So I thought this would be kind of an interesting way to start off our conversation in chapter 1, the ski career part. And what I've done is I took some excerpts from different news outlets online, things that were in print, things that had been said in video, and in bullet form kind of pieced together a patchwork that I think aligns somewhat closely with the actual timeline and arc and trajectory of your ski career. I'm going to read these to you.
Oh boy.
Okay. And number one, if there's anything in the way that this kind of walks through your timeline that's inaccurate, fix that for us. But I'm going to read this to you, and then I'll ask you a question at the end. So you ready for that?
Okay.
And of course, this is sort of
worried.
This is cherry picking stuff too. So
okay.
I just kind of dove in and picked some stuff. But when I looked at it after having copied and pasted some of the stuff, I realized, there's actually a little timeline here with some attached commentary.
Okay.
So here we go. The young woman everyone knows as Liner, right?
Yeah, that was my nickname.
Has been a skier since she could barely walk. Her father is Swiss, and she has dual citizenship. She's the only U.S. woman to score World Cup points in all 5 disciplines. She finished 7th in the combined at the 1998 Nagano Olympics. So you finished 7th in the combined at the 98 Nagano Olympics, yet injuries and mishaps have plagued her since. The awful streak began at the 1999 World Championships and continued through the 2001 Worlds. Then she made it 6 in a row when she crashed in the Olympic downhill at Snow Basin on Tuesday. And this is from a video that had live commentary of a race. The commentator said, "Almost unbelievable she has the guts to leave the start. I'm almost afraid to watch this woman come down the mountain anymore." This was from a 2009 broadcast from Garmisch, Germany.
Oh, that was my last race.
FIS World Cup Alpine Skiing, Women's Super G. The best all-around female skier on the U.S. team has just one Olympic race, Sunday's Supergiant Slalom, to erase the stigma of falling apart when the stakes are the highest. When Lalive fell near the end of her first slalom run in the women's combined event Thursday, then withdrew from the competition, it was the 7th consecutive time she had failed to finish a race in a World Championships or Olympics. So those are some of the things that I cherry-picked from articles and videos that I saw online. First of all, is there anything there to correct?
No, I mean, I think no.
Okay. What thoughts and feelings come up for you when you hear that?
Oh, gosh. It's funny. Maybe my first response is, defensiveness or, there's always more to the story than that. But I mean, in truth, sadly, that was a big part of my career were those times where I failed. And unfortunately, I often did that at the most peak times, at the Olympics and World Championships, where everyone is hyper-focused as opposed to, the rest of the season where we'd have 50 races in a season or something. So that was hard. I mean, it is hard to hear that. But now looking back on my career, I think, honestly, I did have an issue with, you can say choking. I actually am not a huge fan of that term, but I did have an issue with performing at those big events when there was a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And looking back, to be honest, that's the biggest regret of my career. And it still just irks me. I still really struggle with that.
And specifically the regret is?
I think in truth, my regret is that I said this earlier and it will sound maybe very cocky, but I was super talented. I was a really, at the time, one of the best skiers in the world.
And by the way, real quickly, that doesn't sound cocky to me at all because you could back it up.
You're right. And that's the thing. I had the results to back it up in everything but the Olympics and World Championships, which unfortunately is in America, especially, is all anyone focuses on. But otherwise, I had the results to back it up, and I still to this day, I know I was so talented. But I really was not lazy, but I was unable to train myself as well on the mental side of things. And it really just came down to those big events where I would allow myself to focus on the results as opposed to just the skiing part. And that was really just, I think, what was, would cripple me in all those events. So yeah, I think, and I truly do, I never won an Olympic medal, which was my dream since I was 10.
That was the main dream.
Yeah, that was my dream. I mean, I remember at 10 years old, saying that and wanting to do that and believing I could do it and being so close to doing it, actually being in second till right before the finish in the Olympics. So yeah, I think, now I look back and I'm in a totally different phase of my life, and it's a bummer. It's a big bummer. And there's a lot of regret there because I had the ability to do so. And I think I wasn't able to fine tune those aspects of myself as an athlete.
With the benefit of hindsight, and you've grown up a bunch since that and had a lot of life experiences, if you could magically take one bit of your mindset or your understanding and insert it into the brain and heart of that competitive athlete back in the days in a way that would have really helped, what would it have been? What would have been the thing or things that would have helped you turn that mental corner and achieve the results and performance that you wanted?
Well, I think I had a couple things that not personality, but maybe innate things that I had kind of latched onto as in my person. And one was I really felt like being selfish was such a bad thing. And so that did play into my career because I think I wasn't very good at compartmentalizing and at times just realizing I needed to be selfish for this moment. That didn't mean I was a selfish person.
What's an example of that? Put that cookie on the bottom shelf for us.
It was be just prioritizing what it would take to be the best at that time. So whether it was as my parents were going through the divorce, kind of separating myself from that and realizing, that was an aspect of life, but that wasn't everything. I often really struggled too with, I'd have relationships or boyfriends during racing and I wasn't very good at prioritizing my career over, oftentimes they also were athletes. And so I would forego, what was good for me on account of trying to make it happen with them, which was now so stupid. And I think in truth, my biggest now revelation is, it's such a short time in your life. In truth, that those key moments, and even my whole career, 13 years now, I'm like, oh my gosh, that wasn't that long. And I think understanding that for that time in your life, it's a season, and making those sacrifices and making those priorities by no means, was going to derail me for a lifetime or something of that sort. So I think that's truthfully now, and I've talked to a lot of athletes about that, just realizing it's a short moment in your life and do everything you can to make yourself be the best you can be. And because there'll come a time where you're not in that arena anymore. Yeah. And you'll never get that back. And I think about that. I'll never get back an opportunity to be the best at in the world at something. I mean, that will never come back to me. It's kind of crazy.
A couple of things come to mind for me as you're talking, and we had some conversation before we started recording. You were mentioning how relational you are, how much you like helping people feel good and be better, and that's just some of my paraphrasing of what I was hearing from you briefly. And it's interesting that relationships during your active ski career were both important to you, and in hindsight, you realize you allowed them to be distractions that kept you from what you wanted. And, if I was your coach, I'd be like, well, that's a clue to kind of how Caroline Lalive is made, is that your relationships hold a center place in your life.
Yeah.
And as a younger athlete in person back in the day, And as you reflect on it in hindsight, it felt like in many ways it got in the way of what you wanted, which was sort of a shadow side of a natural strength and a natural gift that you undoubtedly bring to all of your relationships. It's a genuine high regard for people and their well-being. And managing that part in your middle of your athletic career was cumbersome and complicated for you because they would bleed over.
That's absolutely true. And I mean, it's interesting having been at the top of my sport and knowing other athletes that in fact did succeed and win medals, and almost always they were, looking at them, they were much better at prioritizing themselves and what they needed to do for that moment in time. I mean, I look at Nelson and I know that's why he was such a good athlete. He was really good at seeing that opportunity and capitalizing on it. And, also other athletes of my era were the same. So, but you're right. I think it was hard because it's also my core essence is one of being relational and that being a really important part of my life. Like I mentioned, my parents were going through kind of an ugly divorce. And so I think there was a little bit of a hole in my life that I was trying to fill with, with people or whatever that might have been. So yeah, it is. It's funny, but I keep saying that. And now looking back, I don't think it would have changed who I was if I had just been able to see that it was just for a moment in time.
Yeah.
And that, I think that was really what I really wrestled with was I don't want to be this like a selfish person, but for that moment, I really wish I had been.
It's so interesting that you attach the word selfish to the thing you were debating back then. For you, it sounds like it was either I'm going to not be selfish or I'm going to focus on my craft, my discipline, and I'm going to be selfish. What made that the choice for you, either between selfish or unselfish?
Well, and at times
because from the outside looking in, I'm like, well, no, I mean, if you want to win a medal, then there's certain things you got to do, and it's not selfish. It's just part of what you're pursuing. But for you at that time, it felt like a choice between selfish or unselfish.
And I think that's some of actually just that's my self-talk and my, what I misidentified it as, because in truth, it was just prioritizing. And I, unfortunately, I think had a hard time prioritizing, just those couple things that needed to supersede what unfortunately I saw as being so important. And now looking back, at those relationships, I'm not in that place now. So that's unfortunate. Mm-hmm. But yeah, just, that's that naivete of being young and not knowing. And yeah. And I think too, when you're in that world and you're young, you do think, it's very myopic. So you're really just involved in your own life at that moment and you don't see the big picture. But I think too, I just wish I had known that it's just such a small season in your life. And you never get it back. And I mentioned to you being at the 98 Olympics and I was young, I was 18 and I thought, oh my gosh, the sky's the limit. If I ski till I'm 30, I've got 12 years. Think of all the awesome things I can do in 12 years and how many, World Cups I could win, how many Olympic medals I could win. That's really, I remember thinking that, in the 98 Olympics. And then somehow I remember, at my, when I ended my career in 2009 thinking, geez, that was 12 years ago and boom, it's done and gone and that's it. It's crazy.
So imagine that you're talking to a young athlete who is somewhere near where you were at the beginning of your career, 18, 19, tons of potential, growing attention from the world. And as your talent is developing, you're beginning to put in some good results. But they have a similar conflict. They've got, they have a difficult time compartmentalizing or continuing to prioritize what they know they want so badly in the midst of other competing priorities and things. What would you tell that young athlete at this point in their career?
Well, it's interesting because I think this came full circle to me when I became a mom. And actually I started this with two other friends. We started this, it was called Inspired Life Network. And it was really geared toward women so as to rally behind women and help nurture women in whatever phase and place they are in their life and give them, support systems and motivational stuff. And I remember the buzzword, the thought was we can have it all, like it's just about balance. And I remember I kind of had this epiphany and I was like, you can't have it all. And it's not about like that you'll never have something in your life, but it's really seasons. It's seasons of life. And if you're trying to have it all, for one, you miss out, I think, on excelling or having excellence in a certain area. But I think you sell yourself short. So actually, when I was finally a mother and realized, you can't have it all, it's a season, and it's really about what you prioritize in that season of life, which is biblical. We all, there's a season for everything.
Yeah.
I think that gives you freedom to be able to prioritize, knowing it's this time. It's just for this little circle of time where I am. So now as a mom and looking back on myself as an athlete, and when I do talk to athletes now, I really just try to emphasize this is such a small time in your life. And, if you can look very objectively at what you need to do objectively and figure out what it's going to take to be successful, do everything in your power to make that happen. And the crazy thing, and I was thinking about this actually when I knew we were going to talk, you can do all those things and really truly put everything on your side. And there's still chance that you won't do it. There's still that unknown, especially in skiing. There's so many variables that are outside of your control. But I really do think if you can do everything in your power with what is in your control, you have such a greater opportunity for success. And that's true of any part in your life.
Right. I was just thinking that. I mean, that applies to every part of human
and
existence.
I'm really learning that now as a mother, and in my hard seasons with toddlers and little kids and, being an older mom and having lived a life that was pretty much centered around what I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it. That's also been a really kind of eye-opener for me, is this is a season in my life right now. And it's the chapter that I'm living, and I need to embrace that. So I do think that's sadly the part of being young and naive, and you don't see that. I really wish I had taken better advantage of that. But the crazy thing is I again just was kind of corresponding with a coach of mine, and we used to have these awesome talks. In Europe, they would drive a cargo van around with all of our equipment. Because each athlete travels with about 30 pair of skis.
Gosh.
Yeah. So it's just, this amount of stuff you have is insane. And I would always like to ride in the cargo van because would be me and a coach. And it was just kind of a time to have like a normal back and forth with somebody. And so this coach, one particular coach, and I had such a really good relationship. And I remember he just like got down to the nitty gritty with me and just laid it out there where I was really failing myself as an athlete. And it was so honest, and, I so appreciate it now looking back. It was ballsy. He was like, you're an amazing athlete, but on this other side, you are just sucking, and you better pull it together or it's never going to happen. And even him telling me that, I still wasn't willing to make that adjustment, which is like just so maddening now.
What would it have taken to make that adjustment?
It would have been so easy.
And what would it have been?
It really would have been taking a step back and just seeing the simple steps for that moment, what I needed to do. And, so I think it was twofold. One was I was easily distracted by peripheral stuff in my life and people, and prioritized that ahead of my skiing. But the second thing too was, I think I was, like in big events, I was, there's those two mindsets, like result or, the ultimate place versus the progress or the
process.
The process. Yeah, exactly. And I think I just needed to shift that mindset, because when I did have great results, that's all it was. I just focused on what I needed to do to ski well, and the rest came. Mm-hmm. And when I really faltered, like in the '02 Olympics, all I was focused on was winning a medal. And I just simply forgot to ski. So it's like, sounds so stupid and trivial, but that was the bottom line. All I needed to do was focus on the process. So I think that's, that was a really big thing. And the two go hand in hand, just looking at what I needed to do to be successful and just sticking to that, and being willing to sacrifice kind of peripheral stuff.
You said you were at the Olympics and you wanted the results so badly that you forgot to ski. And immediately I bounce from that to life and go, gosh, how many of us in life have some measure of success that is really specific to us, and we're so fixated on that we forget to live.
Totally.
People reach midlife or end of life, whenever that might come, and look back and go, holy crap, I was pushing so hard for X, Y, and Z, and I just forgot to live.
Right. I'm experiencing that with my kids right now, where I've always kind of been, I'm real goal driven and result driven, unfortunately. And I think a lot of times now with my kids, I just want them to get through this difficult phase so we can get on to the next phase. And already looking back,
I remember that phase. It's brutal.
Yeah, but then I'm like, brutal. Oh shoot, I'll never get this phase again. Like I nursed both my kids this crazy long time and had a really hard time weaning my youngest little guy, and I nursed through my whole pregnancy. So I literally have been nursing for like 5 years.
Wow. And
now like trying to wean him has been really hard. But then I had this thought like, well, I'll never be here again. I'll never have this again. So I do think, yeah, it happens all the time in our life.
This is not a dress rehearsal, and it's so hard to remember that from day to day.
Yeah.
Other things that come up for me as you're talking about your story that I think can apply to all of us is just, you knew you had a gift, and a gift that you could cultivate and develop so that it would become an even more powerful asset for you in the skiing world. You had innate talent, you had drive, you had all these things, but other peripheral things distracted you from your gift and being able to deploy it and develop it to the full potential that you believe you had and others believed you had. And that's one thing I would want to tell, especially folks in the first third maybe of their story, using a statistically normal lifespan of 75 years or whatever, who have, and it doesn't have to be an athletic gift or potential. Maybe they're great at science. I think when we can help younger people get clear on some of their gifting early and help them really value cultivating, developing, and focusing on that gift and paying some of the prices that come along with that. Because you said, in a sense, there was a fear of missing out going on for you. I mean, you weren't at that time making the decisions that would have inevitably cost you something in order to gain the other thing that was even more valuable to you.
You're right. It's one to recognize the gift that you have, and how, in so many ways we're called to be good stewards of that gift, and to maximize that gift. So yeah, I think you're right. Just recognizing that and taking the steps to be the best. Steward's not really a great word, but to maximize that gift, whatever that might be. And I think too, recognizing that gift might be short-lived. I think that's, when you're young, you don't see that.
Sounds like there's a sense in which, and I may be overreaching here, so if I am, stop me, but there's a sense in which back in those days, you were aware of your talent. Others were aware of your talent. You were developing those gifts and those talents. And somewhere along the way, things began to pull at you that didn't allow you to stay in the game mentally, because you had the raw ability.
Totally.
But the mental game, of course, was where you got tripped up. It sounds like there was a sense in which you didn't feel complete freedom to be who you were, even if being who you were and pursuing what you could become cost other people. Or maybe even there was a sense that it would cost you something. Like, if I train the way I believe I need to train, then this relationship with this guy or with this gal, or your parents are going through a divorce, that's a tough time for anyone. Of course it's going to distract you. But I've got to be the Caroline Lalive skier that I believe I can be. And yeah, they're having a divorce, but I'm going to pursue this come hell or high water. So it seems like there was a sense in which you didn't yet have the self-permission or the freedom to really be who you were.
Yeah, that's probably a pretty, an accurate portrayal. I think, I was totally comfortable and confident in my person, but I do think I misidentified aspects of myself and maybe what needed to happen with that being bad, or that would make me somebody that ultimately I didn't want to be, which I know is now looking back is totally not the case. But
these beliefs about selfishness and unselfishness.
Yeah, exactly. Or, like an ego. Ego was a really big thing because in my family, based on our faith, that ego was not always viewed as a good thing. And so that was always a little bit of a struggle too, like how to be confident and have some ego, but have it be detrimental to your person. So
Interesting. So you just felt some tension there that you weren't able to resolve. Like if I'm this way, aren't I now maybe being that kind of bad person that I've learned about?
just the person that, that nobody wants me to be, I mean, it wasn't even what anyone else wants. It was my own personal struggle.
You said earlier when you said I was really talented, maybe that sounds cocky. And I quickly said, no, it doesn't, because you could back it up. And,
yeah.
And my hope for people that I work with as a coach or that listen to the podcast or anyone I might get to interact with is just that they get a clear sense of who they are and what they're good at. And they get a clear sense of who they're not and what they're not good at, and can be aware of both of those without at the same time assigning any value to themselves as a result. So that you as a 19-year-old top performing, top caliber athlete could say, I am one of the best in the world at skiing.
Yeah. It's so true.
And
so true.
In this other area of life, not so great. And that neither of those would be a stroke to your ego or a ding on your ego. They would just be statements of kind of who you understand yourself to be as a human.
That's so true. And I think, being bold in that, now I look and I think, gosh, I should have been like so much more like bold and proud of what I did and who I was. And it's funny because, I look back at my career and I think my number one emotion when I look at my career is just regret, which is so unfortunate. And, and then people from the outside will say, what are you talking about? You were an 3-time Olympian, 3-time. There's, that question in there, but, went to world championships, we're national champion, we're junior world champion, we're on the podium in World Cups many a time. And, people are like, how can you not be so proud of that? And it's really funny because for whatever reason, I still feel that sense of, I just missed a huge opportunity.
That's a great segue into the next question I want to ask you. But before I ask that question, I want to drop something else in there. If I can remember it, I always do this little lead in and I can't remember what the thing was. It's about process versus results. Because that really rings a bell for me.
That's huge
in life. And I didn't never perform nearly the level that you did in my sport, which was soccer. But it makes me think back to, later in my career, well beyond when I had learned the actual technical foundations for the sport, I started taking my eye off the ball, literally, when I would get ready to kick the ball. I would pick my eye up right before contact and look where I hoped it would go. And in every sense, the way that I played the ball began to diminish. And it's always confused me because I played soccer from 5, and I know that you keep your eye on the ball. You look up first, then you look at the ball until you've struck it, and even a little bit afterwards. And it relates to me because I think we can get so focused on where am I going? Where am I headed? How am I going to get there? That we don't just put in the work day in and day out and let that yield a result for us in time. And of course, in sports psychology, in the psychology of leadership, and the psychology of just personal development, being the best you can be, this is a well-worn path people have trod, the value of process over results.
Totally.
And the tension between process and results. Because of course, as an athlete, you said at 10 you wanted to be in the Olympics. You had a bright, shining result on the horizon you were shooting for. So it's not as if we don't have things that we hope for, but then how do we rewind it and just be here now and do the next thing? I think that's one of the great questions of life, whether it's in athletics or in our professional lives or in our lives with our families. And what do you think a key is to staying present? I kind of hate that word because it's so overused, but really staying present today with what you can do. Because that was another thing you hit on, like being aware of what you can do versus what you can't do and making sure you're focused on what you can do. So how do you do that today?
We always, every year, as a skier and in life, now I'm realizing this, we're so goal oriented. So you have your long-term goals and your short-term goals. And I think for me now, when I look back at it as an athlete and as a person, you do want to have a sense of where you want to go. That's really important in life. I think you can't just say whatever happens, and whatever I go, wherever I go, just kind of be like a bag in the wind. So you have your ultimate goal. And I think you just work backwards from there to the very first step, whatever it's going to take to get there. And I think you have to break it down, because no person can, I couldn't have been a 10-year-old and say, I want to win an Olympic medal and just leave it at that. So I think whatever your goal is or whatever you're trying to accomplish, you have to break it down just to the very first step. And I think it is, you need to focus on the process without losing sight of what the ultimate goal is. But you can't just hyper focus on that goal. And I know when I was a coach, we worked on that with kids a lot, because in society today, we're really kind of goal, or, the ultimate prize
results
focus.
oriented.
Yeah, we are so results oriented and focused, and people have forgotten the process. But it's funny, as an athlete, I loved the process, except for maybe the mental side, but training and everything that went into it, I loved that.
Gosh, I did too.
Yeah, and now I miss all that. I'm like, how cool is it to get to train, like, as that be your job, to train and do all that. I mean, I miss that so much, and I think it's such an awesome part of the process. So, and again, that's, I think, where I really slipped up, in those big events. I just took my eye off that just step-by-step process, which is also, when it's so smaller like that, it's so much easier not to control, but to make the necessary adjustments. The big picture is so hard. You don't know.
So it's important to zoom out and have that big picture so you have an idea of where you want to go.
Yeah.
And then, you can do that occasionally, but then zooming back in becomes way more critical, because what today can I do to move toward that big picture?
Right.
And you're among those who I think are fortunate to know at a fairly young age what one of those burning points on your horizon was: Olympics,
right,
medalist,
yeah,
and to begin to have something to work toward. Not everyone has that. And so I just want to say to the listeners, part of creating the life that's meaningful to you and beneficial to other people is getting clear on what you want. And it doesn't have to be an athletic endeavor. It can be, I want to build awesome relationships with people. I want to be an engineer. I want to it doesn't matter. And it doesn't have to be a lifelong goal either. It can be just, what do you really want now? What's really interesting to you now? But a lot of people, many people anyway, don't have the clarity on that or feel the capacity to even answer that question. I think it's a really important question for all of us, and those of us who are parents, to help our kids begin to wrestle with, like, what do you really like? What do you really want to do more of?
I think, to bring that, or to parlay that now into parenting, I know I find myself like, sometimes you're just in the thick of madness and chaos, and it's really easy to just be reactionary and kind of lose sight of ultimately, like, what kind of parent do I want to be, and what would I like my children to end up being as human beings, not necessarily career-wise, but just them as a person. And then that's been really helpful for me too, to keep my eye on the big picture. Like, I want my kids to be well-rounded, kind members of, contributing members of society. And so what do I need to do today? And it's so funny, because I read that book, Atomic Habits, and it's those small, daily choices, daily habits. That's what makes the big picture. It's not the suddenly big life change, because those don't stick. It's the small daily, the process of making those small choices and those habits. And skiing, was exactly the same. We would train, 300 days a year on snow, for whatever, that 1 minute down the mountain, whatever it was. And it was all that step-by-step choice and step-by-step process.
One of your new measures of success in your life is the quality of parenting you're providing. How do you convert your former understanding of selfish and unselfish into something that's useful to you today as a parent? Because I could see potentially the possibility where you would lose yourself in the midst of parenting in your effort to achieve high-quality parenting.
Totally, or high-quality kids in your mind.
And then bring to parenting a lesser version of yourself, because maybe you believe it's still selfish to do what you need to do to show up well.
It is. It's amazing how themes replay in your life.
Is it okay for Caroline to tell her kids to go away for,
right, so
a
I
half
can go
hour
do
so you can do whatever you want?
And that's totally true, and that's a big issue. And ironically, it's a point of friction between my husband and I, because as he was as an athlete, he has the ability now, much at times to my dismay, to...
We love you, Nelson.
Yeah, we love you. To know what he needs as a person in order to stay happy and sane, and
he does that.
And he does that.
Yeah.
And I,
Is that selfish?
yeah, in my mind, we have that exact argument that it comes across as being selfish to me, but it's true. And my sister said this to me yesterday. We were driving home from her chemo session, and she said, we were raised always like love thy neighbor as thyself. And so you always would prioritize thy neighbor ahead of self. And she was thinking, but in truth, like you can't love anyone else if you don't love yourself. And you're only able to love someone else in as much as you have love to give.
It's such a simple phrase, love thy neighbor as thyself, but there are so many levels of meaning and nuance
huge.
involved there.
Yeah.
Which of course is the magic of that kind of wisdom, is that as you dig into it more, you go, oh, wait a second. It's not just be super nice to everybody.
Right.
It's like love them as you would love yourself. And how would you love yourself? Well, you'd freaking give yourself the world. You would treat yourself with kindness and generosity and grace. And if we're not, like to your point, if we're not able to do that with ourselves, then the quality of love we'll offer to other people is going to be equally diminished.
Totally. And I think, you look at people, that maybe, right, are not able to love others well. And more often than not, it's an internal issue with themselves. So that thread in my own life is definitely, it continues. And it's amazing now as a parent, how that turns, for me, it turns into resentment.
What turns into resentment?
The feeling like I'm losing myself, or I'm not able to prioritize myself. Whereas in skiing, it wasn't so much resentment. I think it was, now it's more regret, which is a terrible feeling. And so, now I have to really identify that feeling of resentment, understanding that, hey, if I'm resentful that I'm not having this time to do something, that's my deal.
Nice catch.
Yeah. So that's a good thing to keep in mind.
I really appreciate your honesty about yourself and your mental and emotional challenges, especially during your skiing chapter, and even how those things begin to play out as in the next chapters as an adult and a parent and a wife, because you performed at the highest levels of your sport. And it's easy for those of us who didn't, who see people like you only on TV, to go, wow, they just have achieved perfection mentally and physically and emotionally. And of course, we know on one level that's not true, but it's another thing to hear it from someone's lips like yours, who says, man, I was 10 seconds from the finish line and crashed and burned. And it was a mental game, not a physical game. I had a ton of talent, and I was wrapped around the axle on this. And I think that helps us all to feel more normal and to feel a sense of camaraderie and a bond of brotherhood and sisterhood and as humans.
Yeah. I think, you're right.
Everybody's got something.
Everyone does.
Or a bunch of somethings.
Yeah. And I think it's a really good realization, because I think in society we so much focus on success and those people that have success, that we often forget the people that were poised for success and absolutely didn't have the success, and why that is. Because I think I look in my life and my career, like injuries, unfortunately in skiing are just an inevitable part. Like it's unavoidable, which sounds so
slippery boards, slippery snow, high speeds. It's a recipe for an injury.
It sounds so negative and jaded almost, but it's just the reality of it. And so you go into the sport knowing at some point in your career you're going to have a season-ending injury. Most likely, for women, it's like 97% chance that you'll blow out your knee in the span of your career, at least one time. And so that you think that, and yet you want to put everything in your court so as to be poised for success. And yet there can still be that unknown. And I think that's true in life. You want to do everything you possibly can to be ready for success, but life can still come at you and prevent that success. So I think that's also really important to focus on, because I think so much so we love the story of the underdog that wins. We love the story of the comeback kid that succeeds, but you don't always hear of the people that they did everything that they could and they still didn't succeed.
And it was really interesting to me earlier on in this conversation when you were describing your earlier career, you said in the key moments you failed. And I'm curious, does that mean you look back on your career and consider yourself to have been a failure?
I know that's hard. No, I think I consider myself that I didn't meet my full potential and I did not capitalize on the opportunity that I had. in that sense, I failed to meet my goal. Absolutely. I don't think I'm a failure per se, but I do, very honestly realize I kind of blew it.
Yeah, according to what you were trying to shoot for.
Yeah. And I had moments of greatness and moments of success, but in the big scheme of things, there was a lot of missed opportunity.
So I'm really persuaded of this idea that our story and our path and our purpose in life are inseparable. And our story can be especially powerful to us when we're willing to turn and look at it, own it, embrace it, and bring it along with us, even and especially the most painful parts. And I've shared in this podcast many times how the anxiety that I've dealt with all of my life has been the single most painful lifelong battle that I've had. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago when I finally said, okay, looks like you're still here. You haven't gone away. So you might as well come along, and we're just going to figure out what good you have in this world. And that moment, that mental moment became the catalyst for this podcast, became the catalyst for the graveyard groups, became a catalyst for a lot of the ways that I coach and interact with people. And it could never have been that had I not finally, and really it was just out of exasperation. It was like, nothing else is working. I guess I'm just going to have to allow you to come along.
Wow.
And immediately it was transformed into something else. I mean, the anxiety still exists and it's still a drag and it's painful, but it also suddenly is not like this little, troll. It's this cute little hobbit maybe, or not hobbit, gremlin, in the fuzzy form where he can go, if you add water to the gremlins, they turn into crazy things, but in their original form, these cute little, so my relationship with that has changed. And all of that is to lead into a question that I'm really excited about that I hope ends up being as cool as I think it'll be.
Okay.
But I came up with it earlier. And it's that if your story took the shape of a person and knocked on that door behind you, and you got up and answered the door, and your story in the form of a person walked in, how would you relate to that person? How would you feel about that person being in your presence?
It's funny because when you ask that, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, it's me. That person is me. And I like myself. I like what my story is for the most part and has been. I think if that person came, something that I've been wrestling with a little bit in my life has been what is my story and what is my narrative. Because I think that's can be a very powerful thing or can be a very detrimental thing to you. Whatever stories you tell yourself or what you've created your story to be. And I have realized for a while now that I allowed my story to be one of kind of missed opportunity and missed successes. And I catch myself that I don't want that to be my story. I don't want that to be kind of what's continuing on in my life. And so it's funny because I do really pride myself and relish honesty and being like open and kind of naked in the sense that, I have this regret. But and then having said that, I don't really want that to continue to be my story. So you ask if that person would come. I think I'd challenge that person to just look at what is their story and how do they want to change their story. And I think that for my own life, I don't want to keep saying this narrative of that I blew it or that I just missed opportunity. I don't want that to continue to be.
What do you want to say instead? And not only what do you want to say differently, but how do you actually want it to feel and be different for you?
I know. I know I have said this. I never want to have this regret. I never want to recreate or feel this regretful about anything ever again in my life. So I think that's been a really, that's a pretty powerful sense. And so I think, reminding that person, and I have to remind myself that all the time, like, that feeling of regret is so crappy. And how can I make sure that I don't continue to recreate that?
Does that lead you to feel white knuckly about stuff and about life, or is it a helpful motivator to you?
I think it's very helpful because it's a perspective that it's reality. It's the reality for me. That it's almost like how Brene Brown talks about shame. Like there is shame in that, But just understanding that there can be huge growth in that too. And, it was super humbling. And I think there's a beautiful thing in that. So, and I do believe, that my story or my journey is one that needs to be told too. Because, again, people, I think if we're only always hearing success, 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 it's really hard to understand when you don't have it, why. So I think, part of my journey was that lack of success, even though I regret that. I think that is something that needs to be shared. And I feel emboldened by that in ways that I hope it does help somebody else.
It's interesting too, because, that's one of the ways you evaluate your career. And I look at your career from the outside and go, holy crap, the determination, the grit, the perseverance, the drive to stay in the game after multiple injuries, a handful of which you could have said, yep, that's the last one. To try to stand on two legs and go really fast down a mountain on slippery skis doesn't make any sense any longer because I keep breaking myself. But from the outside looking in, you showed tremendous resolve and perseverance and drive and courage to stay in the game.
Yeah,
and that to me is a hallmark of success on one level.
You're right. And I do think that's something I really do pride myself in, was that, I picked myself up. Now in my life, I've had like 32 surgeries, but in my ski career, I think I had like, something like 22 or 25 or something crazy like that.
So since 7 or 8 of those have come post skiing, that means you haven't slowed down a whole lot.
Yeah, well, kids will wreck you that way. But yeah, so I do, that's something that I think I do really pride myself in, and I do feel very accomplished that I had no problem picking myself up and pushing and going. And I do feel like that, that is probably an awesome aspect of my career and of myself.
Yeah.
And just being really resilient and tough. I do really feel like I have that, which I like.
I hope you'll keep chewing on this story part.
I think about it every day.
And considering how to continue to evolve your relationship with your story so it becomes more and more a welcome companion as you move forward, and less someone you're trying to distance yourself from, or
that deep, that kind of that pain. I agree. And it is funny because it's in waves, like now being, in my 40s and looking back, it's not as fresh and raw for sure. I've been out of the sport now for 12, 13 years. But there's moments like when you were reading those quotes. That moment, that just brings back that rawness, like boom. And ironically, like my husband won an Olympic medal. And whenever we do stuff together and he brings his medal, that's another time where it's super raw and painful for me. But, the reality is that's how it happened. Yeah. And I got to deal with that.
Yeah. Or not.
Yeah.
You can choose.
Yeah.
And I guess what I just want to encourage you and all of us to do is continue to choose to turn and face our stories and resolve them, integrate them, and bring them forward into our lives. Because without a doubt, you already are, and have a lot more potential to continue to influence a lot of people with the power of your story.
I hope so.
And I'm sure you're already doing that. And I think the more you evolve your relationship with your story, the more power you're going to bring to any conversation, any relationship as a result.
That's true. That's true. As the story progresses, yeah.
We turn the corner a little bit toward the second chapter of your story that we're going to delve into today. But before we do that, I want talked in preparation for this conversation about skiing as a metaphor. And I love a good metaphor. The power of a metaphor to convey a lesson, a principle, an idea in the form of a picture or a story is just amazing. You could write a whole book about something, and then it doesn't do as good a job as one metaphor does.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And so we were talking a little about skiing as a metaphor. When you're skiing your best, what are some of the technical and mental qualities that are on display that we can then transfer over to life?
I think it absolutely goes back to that process mindset. Whenever I skied my best, and I think this is true across the board with athletes, you have to be willing to risk, to kick out of that start gate. There is always the element of the unknown, so you just have to be okay with that. And it's the focus on turn by turn, where you are at that moment, and doing that the best you can at that one moment. And that's so true of life.
What are some of the elements of a high quality turn?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything from your position on the ski, your pressure on the outside ski, your body position. There's so many things, and that's why we train as much as we do. It's that whole like 10,000 hours concept, and there's so much that goes into it. But I know too that you train it so much that it becomes automatic, and yet you still have to put your mind to that task. And some people think like the best skiers. I mean, Bodie Miller was kind of one of these people that I think gave a misnomer, but that you're like out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And that absolutely isn't the case. I think you're absolutely in control because it's something that you've done over and over and over, and you're able to push the limit because you've trained in that limit.
You know where that edge is.
Yeah, and that edge, the more you train it, you're able to push that edge, and it becomes a comfort. And there are those moments where you can go over the edge and have this amazing kind of out of control moment, and it can bode well for you. But more often than not, if you've never been in that moment before and you've never trained it, it's not going to go well. So I think that's a really important thing in skiing. There's risk, but it's calculated risk, that where your limit is, where that kind of that zone is, and you stay there. And yeah, you don't focus on the possibility of something bad. You only are focused on the possibility of good. And I learned that really profoundly. We would do a lot of visualization in skiing, and I would go through these weird phases where I would like self-sabotage when I would be visualizing myself skiing, and I would visualize myself crashing. I was like, what are you doing? Why would you think that? And it was like my mind, kind of messing with me. And so it was always, you focus on what you want to do, not what you don't want to do. So if you would inspect a course and you would see an icy section of the course, you would not in your mind play over, I don't want to lean in here. You would play in your mind, I want to be really strong on my outside ski here. And that's, I think, such a really pivotal part in as being an athlete. And I tell this with young kids now all the time. The talk that you're giving yourself, if you're continually saying what you don't want to do, you do it because your focus is on what not to do. Whereas, your focus on what to do is what allows you to perform well. So yeah, that moment where you're, the best results also were one where you're the most relaxed and you're not fearful. And in fact, you and I talked about this, but when you are fearful or passive or focused on what might go awry, that's always when things did. And I look back every time I had a really bad crash or, an accident or would go out, it was because I was focused on what not to do, or I was fearful. And you cannot be that way. You have to push in to it as in the sense that you're one of a positive mindset and one of being proactive. As soon as you were on the defense, that's when it was always super dangerous.
What's the difference between fear and normal game day nerves?
Yeah, I mean, nerves are awesome. That's like what helps you rise to the occasion. People say,
I hope we all hear that. Nerves are awesome.
Yeah,
and I believe that to be true.
Butterfly in your stomach, that's such a good element. And it's funny, little young kids, I think when they get that, they don't know that that's good. I mean, that's in truth, I think what allows you to do well and rise to the occasion, because you have that little bit of, it's not angst, but it's, that sense of the unknown a little bit.
High alert.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, athletes, I think that when they retire, it's because they didn't have that anymore. Mm-hmm. And you almost can't perform as well. Mm-hmm. It just became like blah, you're flat. So I think, yeah, identifying that excitement is so good. It's really positive. The difference in fear is the kind of the obsession of the negativity of what could happen, as opposed to the excitement of what could happen in the sense of a positive realm. So I think that's it. And as an athlete, especially, in speed events where you're going 80, 90 miles an hour on two little wooden sticks with nothing around you, as soon as you were fearful, it's such a dangerous place to be. So that's a big part of that mindset. And coming back from injuries, that was always a really big thing to overcome that fear spot, because it's just, it's not safe. And life's like that. I think like you were wanting, we were chatting about that. You have to be proactive. You cannot be in kind of a response state. And fear is what's like ruling your life. It's impossible I think, to make progress and be successful.
So as a skier, there's sort of a difference between like attacking the hill and sort of just skiing down the hill.
Totally. And it's a big difference, I think, is super important to identify, is it's not recklessness, because that is, that's dangerous, and that's poses a huge risk for injury or for stuff to go awry. So it's like super confident operating within where your limits are, but being like right there on the edge of those limits, and being proactive about it. We always said that in skiing. Even your stance is one of being proactive and in anticipation, as opposed to reactionary and just reacting to whatever it is. A big thing is terrain. If you're coming into a jump, 80, 90 miles an hour, and some jumps, we would fly 2 football fields, and you're,
goodness gracious.
Yeah. And you're,
you can think about stuff in midair over the course of the 10 seconds of that's a lot of time in the air.
Yeah. I mean, I think women, we wouldn't quite fly 2 football fields, but men, there's, they have huge jumps at crazy high speeds. And, so that's the whole thing. You would want to be in a position where you're proactive as you approach that jump, because as soon as you were, being reactive, it's a disaster.
And, I'm a very average skier, but I know when I'm attacking the hill, leaning downhill on my toes, I'm skiing better. And as soon as I start to sit back a little bit, things go badly, because immediately I'm losing my edges and I'm getting hesitant. And that is counterintuitive too, because sometimes in life we want to get back on our skis and whoa, but that actually produces the opposite results. And especially at your level of competition, sitting back at high speeds.
Oh yeah, it was a disaster.
You're done.
Yeah.
And you're saying it doesn't also mean lean forward at speeds that are outside of your developed zone of operation.
Totally.
So if you've never skied at 85 miles an hour and suddenly you find yourself in that zone, you don't have much experience, we might want to dial it back a little bit.
Totally.
Which doesn't mean you're fearful. It means you're conscious of where you operate best.
Yeah. Well, it's, that calculated risk.
Well, as in skiing, so in life. As in life, so in skiing, apparently. So we're not advocating for recklessness. We are advocating for leaning downhill and attacking the mountain and continuing to learn not only your safe operating zone, but how to develop a new frontier in that safe operating zone. So you're always pushing your ability to operate even more aggressively in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that verbiage, your new frontier.
Cool. I love that metaphor. There's a lot to tease out there. And unfortunately, there's so much to unpack in your story that if we want to hit both chapters, we got to keep moving on. I would love to just stick on the skiing stuff for a while, but there's a whole other chapter happening for you currently. And when I asked if you were willing to have this conversation with me, I knew it was a big ask, because I'm asking you to talk about something that is very close to you right now, very dear to you right now, and the outcome is unknown yet. And it is an encounter with mortality. So would you briefly share with us what's going on in your family, when it started, who's involved, and kind of how everybody's doing currently?
Sure. Well, so I am the oldest of 3. So I have a sister who's in the middle of us kids. So she's currently almost 38. And it was 2 years ago that she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And unfortunately, by the time it was diagnosed, it had already metastasized into her lymph nodes. So at that point, it was, already considered stage 3 breast cancer. So she should share this more so than me, but the thought was initially, true to my sister's character, was to try to fight it non-traditionally. And so she did that, and unfortunately, the cancer then progressed. So she then was faced with having a double mastectomy, and then radiation and chemo, and then another surgery to remove the cancerous nodes in her arm. Then after chemo and the mastectomy, it then further spread, unfortunately, into her bones. So then she had a tumor on her head, on her skull, which then was growing into her brain and pushing out. So that was, kind of like the pinnacle of that. And so then they were much more aggressive with the chemo, and she actually went into remission, which was amazing. But ironically, right before she went into remission, my mom started having odd symptoms, and ended up, they thought she had just some gallstones. So went in for a procedure to either take out the gallbladder or the gallstones, and found that her gallbladder was looking very unhealthy. So they took out the entirety of the gallbladder, and initially the doctor said, "Oh, it's not cancer." And my mom at that point didn't even know cancer was a thought, but was so thankful that, geez, well, dodged that bullet, but I didn't even know that was there. And then sadly, the next day got word that it was in fact cancer. And then the progression of that, she then learned that her cancer had also metastasized to her liver. So then my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 gallbladder cancer, which had metastasized to the liver. And the tumor that was in the liver was and is inoperable. So that basically, you're considered terminal at that point. And it's just crazy. My sister and I were talking about this last night. Anyone that's gone through cancer, and unfortunately more people that have lost loved ones to cancer, there's a state where it switches over to what's called palliative care, which is basically just preparation for death. And they right away put my mom into palliative care category. And then my sister, then right around that same time, got word that she was in remission. So it was like, it's just such a crazy time. You have one sibling my sister, us 3 kids are super close. And she's so young, and to learn that she had, such an advanced state of cancer was just so shocking. And her odds also were looking worse and worse, just based on the type of cancer she has, how aggressive it was, and a bunch of other aspects, and how it had spread already. And then to get hit with, that my mom then had terminal cancer. I mean, I remember when I found out, I just felt like it was some sick joke, and just couldn't believe it. Like, how is this possible? And like my mom, she's like, lightning struck twice, and it was just like, whoa, this is a lot. And then sadly, soon after that, then my sister's cancer returned, then spread even more significantly. So she said it so great. She's like, there's 2 realms of this walk. There's the diagnosis realm, and then there's the hope and the reality of what you're living day to day. And so, if you just look at both their diagnoses, it's terrible. They're both, the life expectancy is very short. It's a horrible, cruel way to die, to be honest. But then there's the hope side of it, where, they both just so firmly are clinging to the thought of hope and healing and recovery and cure, which, I think being on the outside of it, you have to be. Otherwise, it's really hard to live day to day in the state that they're in right now.
And what do the medical professionals who are caring for your mom and your sister, what kind of language do they use to describe where they are in their battle and what they believe the outcome will be based upon their ability to assess medically?
Well, that's what's so interesting. And again, people that have been in this will know this. You have the full range of doctors, of what their approach is, how they talk to you. It's funny, less and less do they give you have X amount of time to live. They don't do that as much anymore, which, like, you see that in the movies, and you hear people saying, I was told I have 3 months to live. And both my mom and sister have, straight up asked that, because I would guess that's something that you kind of want to know. And both were told, well, we don't really say that anymore, but based on statistics. And then they give you, the life expectancy of that. And my mom's type of cancer, when she was diagnosed, the life expectancy was like 12 to 24 months. And that was a year ago. And my sister's life expectancy where she is like 6 to 12 months or something of that sort. But again, that's like, no one says that. And in a lot of ways, that's pretty, I think it's a good progression to not label someone's life with like a timestamp anymore. Because I guess it does, it can have good effects where you have this sense of urgency, but I think then you're almost ruled by this sense of dread almost. And that's just me looking on the outside. And like I said, for my mom and sister, I think it's just been turned on its head by their sense of hope. And I think you have to have that. And it's interesting because now, facing the imminent reality of death for both two of probably most important people in my life besides my husband and my kids, and my dad and my brother, they're not afraid to die, which is pretty profound. And I'm not really afraid for them to die. It's the reality of the loss of, them not being here. And I think the reality of the journey of what's ahead, just knowing that it's an ugly journey. In a lot of ways, it's beautiful in others, but it's also, pretty ugly. So I think, so there's freedom that they're not afraid to die. And I think too, because a lot of people have asked me, what does that feel like? My sister would be a really profound person to talk to because her perspective is just so mind blowing. We're all going to die. So that's kind of the crazy thing is that they're not really in any different scenario than we are. It's just the sickness seems to be speeding that along. But the truth is we could drive away from our meeting here and one of us could meet an untimely death. So I think that is kind of the interesting part. And my sister says that we all get kind of lured into this falsehood that we have all this time. And like I said, for my skiing career, I got lured into a falsehood that I had this long career. And the fact is we all are going to die. We don't know when we're going to die. And it could happen at any time. And so I think that's kind of what's been profound for my mom and my sister, is that, yes, per medical diagnoses, they are dying. But I guess you could say we all are.
They just have a clear diagnosis that could lead to their death as opposed to the rest of us who are yet, right. Cause of death undetermined.
Totally. Yeah. And I think the reality is when you are really looking at death's door, which my mom and sister both are very honestly, mm-hmm. it does change you as opposed to the rest of us that we're not looking at death that way.
How is it changing you? Because you're having to peer through that doorway with them.
Right.
And you're having your own experience of that.
Yeah. It's funny. I just was saying this to my sister last night that you would think that something so profound and raw, like death, like it's right here for them, or it's close, would just like have such an enormous pull on my life and on their life too, actually, that you would make all these revolutionary changes. And we still, all of us, them per their own story, but me specifically, I still get sucked into the stupidities of life, day-to-day life, forgetting that I'm supposed to have had this huge epiphany, that like, take every moment because it could be your last. And it's just amazing how quickly we fall back into our old habits, or we fall back into just complacency, even though I know that, and I think that with my kids, like, hey, I could be gone in a split second. My kids could be gone in a split second. I could never have this time again. And it's so easy to forget that. And my sister, last night, I've noticed that with her parenting, with her daughter. She has a 3-year-old daughter and she's a single parent. She does have that perspective. Like this is it. This is her moment to relish in all those small little things. And she's doing a really beautiful job of it. And she was saying that to me last night. It's just this perspective of gratitude. Like I get one more day, to be with my kid. And in her cancer battle right now, she really is just trying to buy herself time, which is kind of a crazy concept, because she knows unless there's a huge miracle, she's not going to beat cancer at this point where it is in her, medically speaking. That's not to say there's not a miraculous healing that she's holding out for, but she realizes she's just trying to buy time and what to do with that time. And that's crazy profound.
So it sounds like you're even a bit surprised that proximity to mortality like this, two people closest to you in the world, your proximity to that mortality, you're surprised that it doesn't automatically create significant change in the way that you live day to day.
Yeah, and even in my mom and sister, like, we still fight about stupid stuff, and sometimes I'm like, why are we fighting about this? This doesn't matter. In the scheme of things, this is so but it's just funny how human nature, so quickly we forget. And so yeah, I mean, there have been, I think, revolutionary mindset changes for me. And stuff that you grapple with, but in the same breath, it's like the next minute you can just kind of fall right back into your old habits or your old way of thinking, I guess. So
what has a revolutionary mindset shift for you been? You mentioned there have been some.
I think it's perspective. It's just this realization, like, what matters: love, family. I think what legacy you leave behind. I mean, it's true. Like, how are you remembered? And, my family has some, not skeletons in the closet, but some undealt with pain in my immediate family and some not unchecked, but unresolved issues. And like every family does, but some of ours are, a little bit more profound. And it's funny, you would think that would have gotten resolved because there's this sense like there's not much time. And yet, you still have to work through that, and there's still all that crap to deal with. And it's amazing how, as humans, I think we quickly, we quickly forget, but we quickly get sucked into what doesn't matter. And, so there is that constant pulling back because it's every day we're reminded that time's short, but it is funny how we can forget that. So yeah, what you're asking, what was like big epiphanies? Yeah, it's really just priorities and remembering what matters and making sure that people know that you love them and that you tell them you love them and show them that you love them. Yeah. And just, I think, prioritizing quality time, prioritizing whatever it is that lets them know that you love them. And it's crazy. I had, within the last couple of years, two really close people that were really poignant in my ski career, Scott Blair and Kevin Culveride. Scott Blair was my physical therapist through like tons of my injuries, and Kevin Culveride was a PA for Dr. Verplueg, who put me together multiple times. And then Kevin actually would travel on the road with us in Europe at times. So both two people that had a pretty significant part in my life and my skiing, both were diagnosed with brain cancer, with glioblastoma, which is,
awful,
as we know, horrible brain cancer. And I remember Kevin's decline was much faster than Scott's. And I remember it was like nearing what was known, was that he was declining. And I had this like small voice, like, go up to his house and visit he and his family, like, go. And I didn't. And he died.
Take your time.
And then Scott was facing the same demise. And I remember thinking, I never want to be in a position where if I had the opportunity to tell someone what they meant to me, that I missed it. And so then I remember, that was kind of like that revolution to me, or revelation and a revolution in my psyche. Like, it's so funny how we can be so lazy, or so we don't listen to that prompting or that small voice. And so I remember with Scott, I was like, I knew I needed to make a point to let him know the impact he had had on my life. And so now with my mom and sister, it's funny because now it's like, same, there's this urgency because time is running out, so to speak. And still with my sister, with her first round of cancer, I think even still I was a little, I don't know, not guarded, but I just wasn't willing, not when willing. I don't know what it was, to be honest.
Yeah.
I didn't take that prompting to like jump in with her for whatever reason it was. I don't know what it is. If it's just the pull of my life with my kids felt so overwhelming and whatever, but I didn't jump right in there with her. And that was
jump right in to
like in life, like in there with her, with
her battle.
Or just spending that time and being there as much as she needed. And I think I missed that initially in her cancer battle. And it's ironic now being in it and realizing a lot about myself and my mom, just how important it is, to take those prompts and to take that time because, again, regret, you don't want to be left with that thought, like, I just should have done that and I didn't, especially with people.
Yeah. What's something that you're aware of that you could do to allow the revelation to produce a revolution? I'd love that. I wrote that down.
I know.
The way you said that was, well, you said it. Yeah. I wrote it down. I mean but I think that's a really cool way of saying it. The revelation of the likelihood of the loss of your mother and your sister lead to some small revolution for you even today in closing the gap between what's been unsaid and what is said, or what's been undone that you'd like to have done. What's something you could do to, because you said it's amazing how day to day you just get sucked back into life and those things still get unsaid and undone. So what's something you could do to leave a little more out there on the field of the story of your relationships with your mom and your sister?
Yeah, I think it's just absolutely that legacy of love. So whether it's me giving them, my love legacy, leaving that with them, or them leaving that legacy. I think that's really all that matters. And the urgency, and it's like I said, we're all so guilty of that, with everybody. And I think, realizing just so much just does not matter at all. And, and then kind of grasping what does matter. Yeah, it's great. Death is crazy that way. And this sense of finite time is really crazy too, because it's such a misnomer because we all have
right.
finite.
I was just thinking that you're saying that. I mean, that's true of all of us.
And I was saying that, it's some, like for my mom and sister, it seems like so poignant, like, oh, there's this X amount of time, but that's all of us. So yeah. And to be honest, it's been a journey for me too, to not be jaded, for others' struggles that seem to me so
trivial by comparison.
And that's a hard road to play, but for that person, that's huge wherever they are in their life. They maybe have not experienced this level of pain and loss, or, potential loss. So it's also that, that you just don't get jaded to people in where they are in their journey. Cause I do find myself, whether you're on Facebook or Instagram, or you're hearing people and the stuff people bitch about or cry about, and I just want to like throw up because I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, that's your big thing right now in your life.
But I think we need to hear that kind of response from you, because you're someone who is dealing with an unwelcome and, statistically early battle with death of two people that you love. And we need to hear that from someone like you, because you're on the front lines of that experience, and others of us are not immediately on those front lines in a way that we're aware of. And we need to hear that to be shaken out of our...
That's true. You do.
Our pettiness and our complacency.
And that is that perspective, which, yes, I think, what we are facing is pretty profound. But in the same way, not to minimize anyone else's struggle, so I think that is such a delicate balance, to still have that a heart of empathy and a heart of compassion for wherever somebody is, despite, it could seem absolutely so trivial. But I think that's important. And also conversely being a little bit jolted out of our complacency and our like very constrained scope, I'm so guilty of it too. Like I cry and whine to my mom and sister like that my kids are so difficult, they won't sleep, and I'm going on 5 years of no sleep, and it's super challenging where I am as a parent, and then hanging up and being like, I am so lame. Like I'm crying to them that I have no sleep, and my mom has tubes coming out of her and is so uncomfortable and in so much pain, and my sister goes down to chemo weekly and is having poison literally pumped into her body and slowly killing her. I mean, it's just all these like, geez, Louise, like get a grip, Caroline. But we're all there.
Yeah, we've all got our own battles, and sometimes just refreshing our perspective on the battle that we're fighting helps us stay in those battles more productively and have the endurance to run them.
Totally.
But there's a definite tension there for sure. And I like that I really appreciate your highlighting that tension between.
Well, right now I feel like our world is so divided, and so there's so much anger and angst, and my sister and I, again, on these drives, we have great talks.
I bet those are,
yeah.
You've got to record some of those conversations.
And my sister's well, for one, she's brilliant. But she's very, she just has really insightful commentary. And so, obviously the political climate right now is just so divided and so contentious. And I mean, there's just so much anger. And we were just chatting about that, like just in the scope of things, like what a disservice it is to fellow mankind, just what a tragedy. And how something that you can feel so passionate about can lead to such hate and truth. And so Isabel and I were just chatting about that. Like, again, in the reality of life and death, it just doesn't matter.
And two things immediately stand out in what you've shared that I'm going to take away. And one of it is, again, just ringing the bell of people. I mean, that was why in the episode where I did a recap of some of my 5 big takeaways from my experience was, the final of the 5 was just the priority of people, because everyone says that who's experiencing mortality or has experienced mortality, that people matter most, and people are often the very thing that we marginalize the most day to day in our pursuit of very reasonable things, providing for our families, pursuing a career or things that we enjoy, all of which are good. And their intention with giving enough attention to people, whether it's people across the political aisle, so to speak, or people in our family, loved ones. And that's one of the reasons why I've got 25 episodes of this podcast and not just 3, because there's a sense in which could have summed up a lot of these principles in 3 episodes. Said, okay, there you go off. But the reason there's 25 episodes and counting at least is because we don't, as people who are still drawing breath on planet Earth, remember these things regularly. And then even if we're remembering them, we often fall short of taking real world action on them. And so the second thing I'm taking away from what you share with us today that's especially for me is you mentioned how you had this inner prompting to go visit your colleague Kevin, and you didn't. And you realize that inner prompting was there for a reason. And you look back on not following through on that with regret and realizing there was an opportunity to connect in his final days in a way that you did, to let him know how much he meant. And so that really causes me to want to be very vigilant about whatever inner promptings I'm getting, and to say, I don't know why that's there, but I'm doing it.
Yeah, it's true. Because I think those are there for a reason. Yeah. And I think something else that's so important is even like for me, I've said this, but in my mom and sister too, that with just such a real vision of death and like very near vision of death, so to speak, there's still that ebb and flow of, where you're doing everything right, so to speak, as in prioritizing, and then the days where you don't, and realizing that's also part of being human. There's no way to win at this game of life, all the time, so to speak. So I think that's true too, just realizing that there is that ebb and flow. Like for me, I know my biggest challenge right now is to be present with my kids and relish where I am with my kids and give my kids enough of myself and my husband enough of myself and my friends and not miss that while, being hyper focused on my mom and sister and that
Right.
time. And so, there's always that struggle. And I think it's real for everyone, and no matter where you are, but realizing, that it's those small little moments that you make those choices. I think that's what's pretty profound. And like, my sister, silly little things, she's always said it's not like someone making this heroic gesture to her that fills her bucket, so to speak, or that leaves that. It's those little things, those little acts that really, I think, leave the big impression. So I think that's so important to remember.
And that attaches again to a theme that keeps emerging from these conversations, is just how important and magical the mundane moments are.
Yeah.
And so we don't need to think from your story, okay, I've got to write 6-page letters to everyone that's ever meant anything to me this week, and then I'm going to do X and Y. It can mean simply, if you haven't talked to someone that meant something to you, text them. Hey, appreciate you, thinking of you. Call them. Just want to see how you're doing, what's going on. Being thought of by someone else who then initiates with you because they thought of you means a lot, doesn't it? Just to know you're on someone's mind and that you matter in their existence. And so I think that takes the cookie and puts it on the bottom shelf for the rest of us to say, okay, if I'm going to, take something from Caroline's story, and she comes with a lot of credibility because she's operating at the frontier of the transition from life to death in the presence of her mom and her sister. Comes with some credibility. She's saying this from those front lines. What am I going to do? And it could be as simple as, maybe you don't normally hug your spouse when they come in from a day and ask them how they're doing. Okay, do that tonight.
Right.
And then maybe do it again tomorrow. And then you're going to have to go to work and do that stuff, all of which is good. And it highlights again, just for me, why I'm much more interested in the idea of managing life's many tensions rather than achieving balance. Because I think the pursuit of balance is a fool's errand ultimately in the way that we try to pursue it. But you highlighted 3 major tensions already in your life currently. The tension of the attention that your husband and your kids rightly want and deserve from you. The tension present in the fact that your mom and your sister rightly want and need attention from you. And you want to give attention to them, but you also are a professional and you have a social life as well. And each of those want and deserve some attention from you. And trying to create perfect balance in that system, to me, doesn't make sense because like right now, it makes sense that you would give much more attention to your mom and your sister than you might to social things or whatever, but for a time.
Exactly. That's the season.
Yeah, for a season.
Yeah.
And if we can learn to get comfortable with the existence of these tensions and then grow in our capacity to manage them, I think that's a way more robust and frankly, just realistic way to live, as opposed to always trying to achieve balance. Because whenever we have a brief moment of balance, we go, "Ooh, I did it. I got it."
Or I don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah. Now how am I going to keep it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then it becomes a self-fulfilling like prophecy of doom because you can't keep it.
Yeah.
Life's going to throw something at you. I keep going for hours, but we're out of time. And I want to get you on to your next thing because you've got plenty to do. And it means a lot to me that you carved out this time in a very busy schedule with a lot of responsibilities. And it means a lot to me that not only did you create this time, but you were willing to sit and be really honest about where you are, successes, trials, tragedies, triumphs, what's going on with your experience of your and your mom, your sisters and your mom's ordeals. It takes a lot of guts to express that vulnerability. And I want to assure you that that courage is going to pay a lot of dividends in the lives of the listeners who are going to hear this episode.
Oh, I hope
Some of which you may hear about, most of which you won't, and neither will I.
Yeah.
And that's okay, and that's good.
Totally.
But the power of your story to have a ripple effect for literally generations is a result of the fact that you had the courage and the willingness today to share it. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, well, thanks, Andrew. I appreciate the time, and it's always good to unpack that stuff. So thanks.
Everybody listening, remember, you are going to die, but you're not dead yet, so get after it. I like the way Caroline paired revelation and revolution. What revelation did you have listening to Caroline's story that could create some needed revolution in your own life? Whatever the revelation was, heed Caroline's example and encouragement. Do just one thing with that revelation today to minimize deathbed regrets, become even more of the person you were made to be, and live the life you were made to live even more fully. My purpose as a coach is to help you turn revelation into revolution in your own life. Connect with me on Facebook or Instagram at Andrew Petty Coach, or email me at andrew@digdeepwinbig.com. To learn about Graveyard Group Masterminds, where we make time each week to invest in your life's most important work, visit digdeepwinbig.com/The Graveyard Group. I'm so glad you tuned in today. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Andrew Petty is Dying.